Hi. Today I want to talk about how we support safe decision making, particularly around sex and drugs and alcohol for our adolescent children. Those of you parenting adolescents know that our adolescents absolutely crave adventure and independence, as well as that sense of belonging, and it's incredibly intensified by their brain development, which pulls them towards novel experiences, adventure, experimentation and pleasure. And at this time of transition, safe decision making can be hindered by their still developing ability to plan for and anticipate consequences. So our adolescents are often unable to consistently and reliably make safe decisions. We know that personal boundaries and values develop with time, and for our adolescent children, the boundary refinement process occurs through their experimentation. And it's only through experimenting and observing the outcome of their actions that young people become clear on their boundaries and on what's okay and not okay for them. As parents, the best position we can adopt is remaining non-judgmental towards them and to facilitate conversations that support your young person's reflection or self-reflection and good decision making. Key for adolescents is having a strong relationship with at least one of their parents, and this will support their resilience and self-worth, which hones those decision-making skills. Although not all adolescents will experiment with sex, drugs, or alcohol, and some may do so only minimally, and those kids are usually clear about their values. They might be low risk takers, or they might be fearful of the consequences, and it might be an authoritarian parent. Some young people will experiment whilst at uni or college, whilst others just don't feel the need to do so at all. But regardless of their temperament, the majority of young people develop clear decision-making skills and an ability to be confident in their boundaries. Nonetheless, while it's developing, they might need to feel more held by us, and we can hold them by offering protection, support, guidance, and a very open and non-judgmental ear. So I'm going to cover some ideas that might help you deliver clear messages about your expectations with regard to sex, drugs, and alcohol. And the first thing I always say to parents is be really clear within yourself about your views on experimentation, because there's no single approach to supporting young people to safely get through this period. And there's a really broad spectrum of parenting approaches. You know, some parents are very permissive and articulate very few boundaries around sex and drug and alcohol use. They believe they can keep their adolescents safe by allowing drugs and alcohol in their home. And some permissive parents allow any manner of sexual activity and don't create boundaries for such behaviour. Authoritarian parents often have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to these things, and they typically produce an experimenter who hides their behaviour, and in some cases a young person who doesn't experiment due to a real fear of reprimand. Some experimenting teens succeed in evading parental awareness, and they're pretty good at being discreet, whereas others get caught. And when kids get caught, when it's under a very authoritarian parent, there's this real crisis of connection that happens in that parent-child relationship. So the more a young person experiments, the more likely it is that people will become aware of that behaviour. And there are many parents who sit somewhere in the middle on these issues. They're not permissive, but they're not authoritarian. And these parents often struggle to give really clear messages, and what that does is it leaves young people really confused and uncertain of what's expected. Being a consultative parent doesn't mean that we leave this matter open and just respond to situations as they arise. We're clear within ourselves about our expectations when it comes to sex, drugs, and alcohol. And we consultative parents need to ask ourselves the really tricky questions and check in ourselves often about how we feel with regard to our teens' experimental behaviour. We need to regularly reassert our boundaries between safe and unsafe. And it can be quite tempting to avoid proper consideration of these things, as it can feel like a really uncomfortable, sticky sort of situation. But I do say dare to have the awkward conversations with yourself about sex and drugs and alcohol, and get really clear about what you can accept and what's just outside of your comfort zone. The second thing I talk about is communicate expectations super clearly with young people, because if you have clarity around your expectations and your wants for your young person, you're going to be able to communicate those really effectively when the issues come up. So I would ask you to consider what your values are in this regard. So some parents believe, I don't want them to go overboard in their expectation, in their experimentation. Some parents believe they're going to expect that some experimentation is going to happen. And some parents say, well, actually, I want my adolescent to refrain from these behaviours until they're in committed and healthy relationships or until they're adults. Whatever your view is, it's okay, but you just need to be clear on it. Perhaps your views differ when it comes to some of these points, and keep in mind that each young person is different and will have a unique set of needs. But consider what's okay for you when it comes to your young person. There's always going to be an area of compromise, because what you prefer as a parent and what you will accept might be two different things. So what do I mean here? For example, with regards to sex, you might say to yourself, although I would prefer no experimentation to happen, I know that it's normal, but I expect that this might be hard for my adolescent to discuss sex with me, but I'm going to encourage conversations so they're clear on my expectations. Or I expect in the context of a close relationship, my adolescent might become sexually active, and I want them to know about safe sex, as well as about the emotional vulnerability that comes with being in a sexual relationship. Again, you've got to go with what feels comfortable for you. The third thing to say is, remember, the messages that we send as parents are really powerful, and be very clear about the expectations you want to, or the messages you want to give. So some of the helpful messages that I always go back to is, number one is that nothing is so big that you can't discuss it with me, and that if you're ever unsafe or in an emergency, you can come to me. I always say to young people, to my children, I may not agree with or approve of your choices, but I will always have your back and help you. Another message you might give is, I really worry if you are not home when you say you will be. I always love to give the message of it's completely okay to say no. And younger teens might need to use us as that transitional boundary. So if saying no to peers is hard, then they can use you as the reason for saying no. I always say this with my girls. Say, I'd really love to come, but mum won't let me. Use me as the bad cop here to save face. I always hold that line that it's never okay to drive or to get in a car with another who's been drinking or taking drugs, and that alcohol and drugs are dangerous for developing brains. I give the message, the less drugs and alcohol you put in the body, the better your brain and body will function. I also say to young people that if you're going to have sex, practice safe sex with someone who cares about you and respects your desires and boundaries, and who never pushes you to do things that you don't feel like doing. A message I love parents to give to young people is regard that sex is special and something to share with someone who they trust and love, and remind them to keep an eye out for their friends and ask that they do the same for you. Catastrophe can happen when this doesn't occur. Remember, if it's too hard to speak, we want our kids to say that if it's too hard to speak, you can talk to me or family, close family friends or close family. I always hold the line that young people need to share their plans, and that if they share their plans, they will get granted freedom, because freedom is earned when they stay in touch and remain safe and be kind. The last message I always love to give to parents, to give to their young people, is the message of, I will always love you, even if I don't agree with your choices or behaviour. So as parents, how do we help ourselves to help them to make safe decisions? We want to enlist the support of a really supportive team of adults for our adolescent. You've heard the old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it's certainly true during adolescence. We want to be able to support our teens as they separate from us and seek the support and strong connections outside of their home. For my daughters, they have my girlfriends. We call them their fairy godmothers. We have their aunties, and all those women step up, as well as the men in our lives. These adults are so valuable in times of need when your young person is struggling, and they sometimes feel more comfortable to turn to somebody that's not mum or dad. It might be a godparents. Notice who they respond well to. And certainly for my young people, their godmothers and their family members know that they can keep my child's confidence. But if it's a life and death situation, of course, the conversation might need to be raised with me, but most things can stay confident. Remember that authoritative perspective. Just have clear expectations, requests and guidelines, and if your teen flags any of these as unrealistic, be open to collectively review them. Remember, making occasional and appropriate expectations is not a sign of weakness, but when done appropriately, it can help your young person to see you as kind and reasonable, and this can inspire them to behave responsibly. Be their boundary keeper. Before your adolescent has developed a clear set of values and boundaries, before they've reached adulthood, you must be their boundary keeper. Yeah? We can't protect adolescents from all the situations or places where they can access risky behaviours, but it's possible to make family, home, life a safe zone. You know, when it's a safe zone, it's free from peer and social pressures. And that's really, really important. We want to help our young people to say no. Help them anticipate situations where they're going to feel unsafe and come up with lots of ways to support them to say no. Give them permission to blame you. I love the statement of, I'm saving my brains for something better, or I'd rather sit here and watch you guys all be stupid, or no thanks, I hate the taste of vodka. There's many, many examples in my book, Taming Teens. And really, guys, really, really, really prioritize your relationship. Many of us are not in total alignment in the caregiving parenting role. And it's okay for all the adults that are caregiving to have different ideas, but just make sure that your young person witnesses you guys backing and supporting each other, even if you have different opinions. And just remember that young people need to feel held. We can hold them by offering them protection, support, guidance, and an open, non-judgmental ear. And if you're struggling here, go online and find my Taming Teens course and get a copy of my book. And there's heaps and heaps of ideas in there that will really support